Sorry, what's this?
It's for you, but don't tell.
But what for?
Take it, unless you want to have chowder for dinner again.
I think that was the most delicious dinner I've had in all 16 years of my life.
Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Anime with Alvin, where today we're going to be making the Japanese Big Mac from Weathering with You. Now in the movie, this Big Mac looks ethereal. Shinkai Makoto has a knack for animation, lighting, and just making things look really beautiful, and this Big Mac is no exception. It bounces a little bit once the lid is open, and is probably one of the most perfect burgers I've ever seen in my life. And I feel like giving someone that burger when they're at a little bit of a low point in life could really just pick them up, which I think is a really good excuse to try and make the Big Mac, but the way they do it in Japan. Now, while we were in Japan, Tony and I made an excursion to just a local McDonald's where we had to go and sample what the Big Mac was like. Especially having eaten the ones from the States, we were really curious to see if it was any different. And upon opening the box, it definitely was. This one looked way more presentable and had more attention to detail when it comes to assembling the sandwich itself. It basically looked near perfect. The bun was nice and smooth, and upon taking a bite, it was the best Big Mac I've ever had. It didn't even taste like fast food at that point. It just tasted like a really good burger. The beef was flavorful, not overcooked. The sauce was a little bit lighter and tangier than the one we are used to, maybe because they used Kewpie mayo. The lettuce wasn't haphazardly thrown everywhere, and everything just came together so well and so nice that we really wanted to see how we can make a version of this at home. So once we got back to the States, we had to go and make sure that there was quite a difference. So we ordered a regular Big Mac. This is just the one that we got from a local McDonald's here in New York. And upon opening the box, I think we are confirming that the ones in Japan have a clear advantage over the ones here. This one seems to not have the same attention to detail when it comes to being assembled. And upon looking at it, the beef is really overcooked. The bun is kind of dry and tough, and the lettuce is thrown a little bit everywhere. The cheese really isn't even melted. And after taking a bite, it was a clear step down from the one we had in Japan. So what can we do to make a Japanese style Big Mac, the way that reminds us of the perfect one that we had in Japan? So let's first start with the bun. The bun in Japan was a little softer and a little sweeter. I'm guessing maybe took inspiration from some sort of shokupan or milk bread recipe. So that is exactly what we are going to do. And to make a bun that's a little bit softer with a little bit of that sweetness, we're going to start by making a tangjong, which is essentially just a roux you make with milk and flour. You just mix it together and you cook it until it becomes this sticky ball that isn't sticky anymore. As a starter, we're going to combine 3 tablespoons of water, 3 tablespoons of milk, and 2 tablespoons of bread flour in a pan, and just essentially stir fry it, I guess, until it turns into a ball. This will be a gelatinized starch that will help give the rest of our dough a little bit more softness once we throw that in. The dough is pretty standard. In a stand mixer, we're going to combine 300 grams of bread flour, 14 grams of non-fat dry milk, 50 grams of sugar, 6 grams of table salt, a tablespoon of instant yeast, half a cup of whole milk, 1 large egg, and 4 tablespoons of melted butter. And once the dough starts to come together, I'm going to take the little ball of tangjong that we made earlier, just rip that into little pieces and wait for that to incorporate. After mixing the dough until it is nice and glutinous and sticky, this is now going to just proof and rest in a oiled container that is sealed for about 2 hours or so until it is proofed and nice and puffy. Alright, on to the beef. So I noticed in Japan, upon examining the patty of the Big Mac itself, it's less of a beef patty that you would find in a traditional burger, and it has the texture of almost a bouncy sausage patty, which had a lot more fat emulsified in between, and less of those, I guess, like granules of meat that you might eat when you're eating a regular burger. So we're going to make our own ground beef. We're going to take it farther though. So first we're going to start with 1.5 pounds of chuck roast that we've just cubed into 1 inch, and then we're going to put that on a tray and let that freeze until it is about 80% frozen so it's ready to grind. We're aiming for like an 80-20 ratio, but my hunch is that McDonald's has a higher fat content in their beef, so we'll adjust according to what we think feels best. Okay, so we actually did some research online for what the sauce entails. There's a lot of recipes out there, but we're using a recipe by someone who used to work at McDonald's that claims that this one comes really close. So here we go. Instead of regular mayo though, we're going to use half cup of Kewpie mayonnaise. Then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of sweet relish, tablespoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of rice vinegar, half a teaspoon of paprika, half a teaspoon of garlic powder, half a teaspoon of onion powder, just a pinch of white pepper because that seems pretty popular in Japanese cuisine overall. Giving that a mix and a taste, it does in fact taste exactly like the Big Mac sauce that I had in Japan, which was quite some time ago, but the fact that it reminded me of it very closely, I think we're spot on with the sauce here, and the Kewpie mayonnaise gives it a lighter taste. Okay, so one interesting thing that we saw in Japan was that not only do they have a Big Mac, they have something called a Samurai Mac, which is essentially a teriyaki style glazed patty. The patties are dunked in some teriyaki glaze and then put on a Big Mac, which sounds really, really delicious. So we're just gonna make some of that for fun. Plus, it's a good way to use up all the random bottles of soy sauce and stuff we have lying around. So in just a giant sauce pot, we're gonna combine a ratio of approximately 1:1 of soy sauce and meating, and then half of that of sugar, another half of that of sake. So the ratio is 2:1 of soy sauce, meating, sugar, and sake. And this is not a real recipe. I'm just kind of using up all these leftover bottles and making a nice sweet soy sauce. If it's too salty, add more sugar. If it's too sweet, add more soy sauce. Obviously, this is way more than we'll need, but it's a nice sauce that honestly goes with anything, and I plan to take home a lot of it after this is done. Okay, now that our beef is pretty much solidified, we're gonna go and blend that in a food processor, my preferred method of making ground beef, and then we're gonna actually add a little bit more fat. We asked Rachel to go get some fat, and we have beef suet, which is fat taken somewhere between the membranes on the cow, so you have to make sure to take out those membranes. You kind of get this crumbly beef fat that I'm going to add in and pulse until the beef almost turns into a pink-like paste. Usually you don't go this far for just normal burgers, but I think the Big Mac patty is a little bit more emulsified. Then I'm going to shape about 6 of these, and since we have so much leftover beef, we can either make more patties, or because I have an idea on how to make something fun, I'm going to save the rest of this ground beef in a large pile and show you what you can do with that later. So McDonald's uses not fresh onion for their Big Macs, but they're sort of these onions that have been rehydrated from dry, that will retain that onion flavor, but they don't have that acidity or that wateriness of fresh onions, which I think is actually a huge plus. So we're going to give it 2 attempts. We're going to use these onion pieces just that we have, and we're going to hydrate that with water, and we're also going to slice some fresh onions and microwave it to get a little bit of that acidity out and just see if that compares. Okay, our dough has been proofed, approximately doubled in size, so I'm going to shape that into little balls and put them inside some baking molds that are a little taller than usual. We have a DIY mold made with foil, we have a tall pastry ring, and we have a small springform pan, all which will yield slightly different layers of buns, and we'll see which one works the best. I'm going to brush a little bit of water on top and sprinkle some sesame seeds and put that into the oven to bake at approximately 350 degrees for roughly 20 to 25 minutes. While that's going on, I'm going to go ahead and carefully cut the lettuce into nice little shapes that look very similar to the ones that we had in Japan, discarding any ugly outside leaves and trying to use the more prettier sides cut into thin little strips. Okay, now it's time to char our patties and get on moving with the rest of our burger. This is pretty simple. You smash them in a pan, the thinner the better because they're going to shrink up a little bit. Add some salt and pepper and take them out before they're overcooked. Alright, let's take a look at our buns. So we accidentally did the thing where we put in the buns while the oven was still preheating. And because this oven is an express preheater, that means it blasts in a ton of heat from the top heating element, which means it almost broiled our buns. We're still looking at these, definitely a little bit darker than we'd have liked, but I honestly think it's a little bit salvageable if we use the one that is less dark. Obviously would not recommend doing that, but lesson learned. It's probably safest to put in your food in the oven when it is finished preheating, not during. Let's slice this bun that looks the less dark out of all 3 into 3 parts. The top bun, the bottom bun, and the middle part, which is referred to as the crown. And we're going to toast these a dry toast in a pan because I don't believe the ones at McDonald's have any butter in them. They look pretty dry toasted, which I think makes sense for a rich burger like this. Then we are going to begin with assembly. Now, according to the way Big Macs are assembled, it's the bottom bun, then followed by a layer of Big Mac sauce, a sprinkling of lettuce, then goes on cheese, and the patty, which I'm guessing uses the residual heat of the patty to slightly melt the cheese. Then we put on some dehydrated onions. I honestly prefer the taste of the rehydrated dry ones than the microwave fresh ones, so those are going to go back in the samurai sauce. After the onions, we're going to go ahead with the crown bun, then more sauce, then lettuce, then pickles. No cheese this time. Then a patty, then more onions, and a bun. So there's actually only 1 slice of cheese in a Big Mac and 1 layer of pickles on the top. And this might sound odd, why don't you put 2 slices of cheese? But speaking from personal experience with the person that actually runs the McDonald's test kitchen, he definitely knows what he's doing. And there's a reason for that. I'm sure it's a balance of flavor. Okay, so this is our homemade Japanese style inspired Big Mac. Clearly a little too big. I think it's a little thick on both the bun and the meat. Could have done that a little bit thinner. So let's give that a look and taste. And as far as taste wise, Tastes pretty good. I like the sweetness of the bun, but I do think we cut it a little too thick, and the patty should definitely be half the thickness. So we're gonna try to do this again with half the thickness of the bun and half the thickness of the patty and do the samurai version. Let's see if that helps the ratios. So we're gonna assemble it the same exact way, but this time before putting the patty on the bun, I'm gonna dunk them in our samurai glaze, which has reduced by half and has a nice sweet soy, tanginess, and onion flavor to it, which is really cool. And all the craggliness in the patties does catch a lot of the sauce. So we're gonna assemble these just like usual, but I'm gonna personally add a second slice of cheese on top. I think that'll go well with the glaze. Let's cross section this. Obviously it's really tall, but it's pretty cool. Everything is super thick, but I'm sure the one in Japan is a little bit smaller and well more proportion. I guess that American and me just kind of came out a little bit. If we really wanted to make a one-to-one recreation, I think we'd have to work on making the buns even softer, even thinner, and somehow get those patties to be super small, which I've heard is actually cooked in a double griddle at McDonald's itself, which would maintain its thin shape. Okay, after getting a cross section and taking a bite of this, I personally do prefer the flavor of the samurai one a lot more. I think from a balance point of view, the soy sweetness goes really well with the cheese, the beef, and that tangy Big Mac sauce. So honestly, if they serve this in the States, this is the one I would eat every day of the week. Maybe not every day, that would be not good for your health. Okay, so now for leftovers and how we're going to turn the leftovers into some fun stuff. So the trick I like to use when it comes to, getting rid of a lot of meat or cheese is this. You take a whole entire sheet of these Hawaiian bread rolls, either the medium one or the large one, and instead of tearing them into their squares, I actually like to cut them straight down the side. So we're essentially bisecting this into two sheets, a top sheet and a bottom sheet. Now, this is where the fun begins with the large portion I was talking about earlier. I'm actually going to take a rectangular tray and press this massive meat mountain of ground beef into a roughly rectangular shape, approximately the size of a sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, accounting for shrinkage and making sure to salt it because, well, there's not much time to salt it afterwards. You could do that in a griddle, but I think baking it cooks it a lot more evenly and gets the beef into that nice square shape so they can lay that directly on top after you dent the bottom a little bit to make some room. This beef patty rectangle is going to go on top, and then we're going to satisfyingly add some slices of American cheese. Because rectangles are just squares, this will definitely make sense from a geometrical point of view. Then on top, we're going to add any leftover onions that we had lying around. Then we'll throw this back into the oven until the cheese has melted and the onions have started to dehydrate a little bit more. And then with the top sheet of that Hawaiian roll bun, I'm going to brush these a little bit of butter and add the sesame seeds and throw those into the oven until it's nice and toasty. Then we're going to turn that upside down, bring it out, put the Big Mac sauce and some lettuce on the top sheet, and put the pickles on the bottom sheet, so that way we don't heat up everything that doesn't need to be heated. Then we're going to carefully throw the top on the bottom, making sure not to splatter things too much. And then after a nice little press, I'm going to cut these into their own individual squares because the buns on the Hawaiian rolls have conveniently indented themselves where they need to be cut. Now that we have that, everybody can have a Big Mac slider or Mini Mac or Mac Mini, although I think that's a technological device. Anyway, is either satisfyingly proportioned as the beef patty is nicely well ratioed with the bun, which is really soft. And honestly, after eating one of these, this in fact was the closest flavor that we had to the one in Japan. The bun was so squishy, so soft, so delicious. The flavors and the ratios were completely correct. And I guess the lesson learned was that, you can spend your own time making things like your own bread. But honestly, if there's things out there that are just doing it right and it's hard to compete, I'd prefer to just buy those and use those because those are just delicious anyways. And after everybody had one to eat and to sample, we made sure to pack the rest home for whoever wanted it most for Christmas, and that would be Tony. Happy holidays, everybody.